Startling opening fact. Last year, Britain lost over 200 pubs in just 6 months, a staggering acceleration in a decades-long decline that has erased more than a quarter of local watering holes. Human angle. Pubs once served as the living rooms of entire communities. Some of those institutions are now gone forever due to fire, demolition, or silent neglect. 7 have closed their doors for good, and 10 more are clearly at risk. Core questions for the episode. Why are the heartbeats of Britain's towns and villages vanishing? Which beloved pubs could be next? And what is driving the speed of this loss? Evidence and data to gather. Closure timelines, licensing and planning records, property transactions, employment and revenue trends for the hospitality sector, and national and local statistics that show long-term decline. Expert perspectives to include economists and industry analysts to explain market forces, heritage and conservation groups to frame cultural loss, publicans to tell frontline stories, and developers or property owners who present a contrasting viewpoint. Case study approach. Short profiles of the 7 permanently closed pubs with causes, plus concise dossiers on 10 pubs to visit while they remain open, each with the key risk factor, such as redevelopment pressure, financial strain, or structural danger. Narrative arc and pacing. Open with the statistic and a vivid human story, move into data and causal analysis, introduce expert debate, then pivot to the list of pubs to visit and concrete steps listeners can take to see them now. Stakes and closing T's. Emphasize community loss, economic ripple effects, and heritage erosion. End the hook by warning that the window to visit these pubs is closing faster than many realize, and invite the audience to follow the investigation for answers and urgent recommendations. Institution under strain, centuries of community. Historical overview, the pub as long-standing social anchor. For centuries, pubs have been more than places to drink. They have hosted births, marriages, funerals, and the everyday rituals that stitch neighborhoods together. Social functions, the pub as the third place. Pubs serve neither home nor work, but an essential space where conversations cross class lines, neighbors become friends, and local life is visible and audible. Everyday rituals and informal welfare, rituals that matter. Regulars and landlords have organized collections, offered quiet support after a layoff or loss, and noticed need before formal services do. Academic work frames these interactions as informal welfare networks. Cultural practice, community identity. Thousands of small acts inside thousands of pubs have quietly shaped British identity, creating a shared stage for grief, celebration, and civic life. Scale of change, measurable loss. Since 2000, more than a quarter of these institutions have closed their doors for good. Each closure removes a stage where daily life unfolds and leaves a visible gap in the streetscape and a less visible gap in social fabric. Drivers and pressures, long-term erosion. The closures are not isolated events. They reflect decades of economic pressure, changing leisure habits, property market forces, regulatory shifts, and the time pressures of modern life. Immediate consequences, social and spatial impact. When a pub shuts, the neighborhood loses not only a business, but a place for routine social monitoring, mutual aid, and cultural continuity. That absence can increase loneliness and weaken local support networks. Investigative angles for this section. Document lived experience through oral histories with regulars and former landlords, map changes to village and town centers, and link closures to policy and market trends. Look for repeat patterns across different regions. Suggested expert voices who to interview. Social historians, community organizers, public health researchers, and local councillors who can speak to the role pubs play in civic life and to the policy and economic factors behind closures. visual and sound ideas for narration beats, interior audio of an empty bar, ambient street sound where a pub once stood, photographs of events held inside pubs, and close interviews that let listeners hear memories that convey scale and daily practice. Key questions to drive the narrative. How do pubs function as informal welfare providers? What are the measurable social costs when a pub disappears? Which policies or market forces accelerate closures, and what interventions could slow or reverse the trend? Closing note for this section: connect to wider story. Frame the loss of pubs as a symptom of broader social change, a signal that centuries of community practice are under strain, and an invitation to investigate who gains and who loses when these communal stages vanish. Across England and Wales, 38,780 pubs remain open as of mid-2025. But that number is shrinking faster than at any point in recent memory. In just the first 6 months of this year, 209 pubs disappeared, demolished, converted, or left vacant. That is an average of 8 closures every week, a pace that industry groups warn could accelerate further by year-end. The British Beer and Pub Association predicts 378 more will close before December, putting the sector on track to lose 1 pub every single day. This is not a slow drift, but a sharp drop, driven by a tangle of economic pressures. The latest government figures show that pubs now pay about £500 million more in tax than their share of turnover suggests, with a quarter to a third of sales gone before wages, stock, or energy costs are even covered. In April, business rates relief was slashed from 75% to 40%, draining an estimated £215 million from the sector in a single policy change. For many small operators, this meant annual bills more than doubled overnight. Energy costs continue to climb, national living wage requirements are up, and employer contributions for national insurance have risen too. With inflation pushing up the price of every pint and meal, the margins that once kept thousands of pubs afloat have all but vanished. Even in regions with strong local support, the financial math no longer adds up for many landlords. The net result is that each month, more communities lose their local, and with it a vital piece of social infrastructure. The urgency is clear. Without intervention, the pace of closures threatens to outstrip any hope of recovery, leaving only memories where gathering places once stood. This outline focuses on demolition and disaster, examining 7 pubs lost to fire, collapse, or rapid demolition, and what those losses reveal about heritage, law, and community. Case Study 1: The Crooked House, Black Country. August 2023. A fire tore through the building on a Saturday night and reduced the landmark to a charred shell by morning. The building was known for its sloping floors and warped windows, a local curiosity for generations. 2 days later, heavy machinery arrived and demolition proceeded so quickly that council officials later issued an enforcement order demanding the pub be rebuilt. 6 arrests followed as police investigated suspected arson. For many local residents, the loss felt like a bereavement rather than the end of a business. Emphasize demolition and community reaction. Case Study 2: The Star Inn at Harome, North Yorkshire. November 2021, a thatched roof was gutted by fire, later confirmed as arson. The Star had stood since the 14th century. It had earned a Michelin star and a loyal following. Months of closure followed, staff were laid off, and owners described the emotional toll of watching a life work blackened and silent. Insurance covered some costs, but rebuilding a Grade 2 listed inn proved far more expensive and complex than balance sheet numbers suggested. Emphasize heritage and cost. Timeline and chronology to present on screen. Immediate fire response: investigation milestones, demolition actions, council enforcement, arrests, and rebuilding or permanent closure decisions. Highlight speed of events when heritage is lost. Legal and regulatory angles. Key points to cover. Unauthorized demolition versus lawful emergency action, the role of local planning authorities, enforcement powers including rebuild orders, and how listed building status complicates reconstruction. Emphasize legal and listed building issues. Policing and arson investigation, outline forensic timeline, how investigators determine cause, typical delays, and how arrests affect community trust and closure timelines. Note interactions between criminal investigations and planning decisions. Economic and operational consequences, outline effects on staff, supply chains, and the local economy. Note layoffs, loss of tourism revenue, and the financial burden of rebuilding to listed building standards versus modern replacements. Emphasize financial strain. Cultural and emotional impact. Detail community responses, the sense of loss for regulars, and the symbolic role of a pub as a social hub. Include suggested vox pop approaches and testimony from long-term patrons and volunteers. Emphasize community memory. Heritage preservation tensions. Discuss why historic pubs are vulnerable. Thatched roofs, aging structures, high restoration costs, and sometimes inadequate protective measures. Explain how centuries of history can vanish in a single night. Insurance and rebuilding complexity cover typical insurance coverage gaps for heritage items, delays imposed by claims, the extra cost of authentic materials, and the challenge of meeting conservation conditions while reopening quickly. Data and evidence to gather for the documentary. Suggested items, number of pub fires attributed to arson in the last decade, count of unauthorized demolitions of listed pubs, average time from incident to demolition, average cost to rebuild listed pubs, and case outcomes where enforcement orders compelled reconstruction. Present these as investigatory targets. Do not assert figures without sourcing. Expert perspectives to include heritage officers explaining listing constraints, fire investigators on arson patterns, insurance adjusters on coverage limits, local councillors on enforcement powers, and campaigners on community action. Include a contrasting viewpoint from property owners or developers who may argue for safety, liability, or redevelopment. Visual and audio treatment notes. Use archival footage and photographs to show what was lost, slow dissolves to convey absence, ambient interviews for emotional weight, and on-screen captions for key dates read aloud. Pause between incident description and expert commentary for emphasis. Narrative beats and pacing. Begin with a stark incident description, follow with human reaction, then move to legal and financial analysis, and close this section with broader trends and policy questions. Insert a deliberate pause after each case study to let the impact register. Future implications and reporting questions. Explore whether stricter enforcement, faster emergency protections for listed buildings, altered insurance requirements, or community ownership models could reduce future losses. Outline potential outcomes, more prosecutions, faster preservation responses, or continued gradual erosion of historic pubs. Closing outline for the section. Summarize the central thesis. Sudden disasters and rapid demolitions can erase centuries of social and architectural history, and the Crooked House and the Star Inn illustrate the human, legal, and financial complexities that follow. End on a call to further investigation into policy changes and preservation strategies. Suggested interview prompts. Ask investigators about causes and evidence thresholds. Ask council officials about enforcement options and limits. Ask owners about insurance and rebuilding choices. And ask regulars what the pub meant to daily life. Archival and fact-checking checklist. verify dates and times, confirm council enforcement documents, obtain police statements on arrests, review listed building status and conservation reports, and confirm insurance claim outcomes before broadcasting. Transition note to the next section. After closing this case-driven analysis, move to comparative profiles of additional pubs lost in recent years and identify patterns that indicate systemic risks to historic public houses. Brief opening summary setting the theme of this section, a slow burn extinction of local pubs, illustrated by 7 case studies that reveal recurring pressures and systemic risk. Overview of underlying patterns to explore with emphasis on survival pressures, rising operating costs, unpredictable rural trade, heritage obligations, seasonal dependence, and repeated turnover of operators. Case Study 1, The Punch Bowl in Shelley. Key points to cover. Rural location on the edge of the Pennines, shifting revenue model from traditional pub fare to family events and food, each change a reactive measure to rising costs rather than strategic choice. Desired soundbites and local voice reactions about community loss. Case Study 2, The Cauliflower in Ilford. Key points to cover. Victorian grandeur and a heritage listing that protects interiors but creates expensive maintenance obligations. Owners face a trade-off, balancing costly repairs against the risk of being priced out. Include an expert voice on conservation costs. Case Study 3, The Crown and Anchor in Llanidloes. Key points to cover. Heavy dependence on summer visitors to offset winter lulls, how even short closures or operator changes ripple through a small town, and local fears about vacancy and town centre decline. Case Study 4, The Plough Inn in Nottingham. Key points to cover. Pattern of brief shutdowns followed by new tenants, creating chronic uncertainty for regulars and precarious employment for staff. Explore economic and social impacts of repeated turnover. Case Study 5, The Old Point House on the Pembrokeshire coast. Key points to cover. A long closure that sparked conversion rumours into holiday lets, then new investment that revived the site as a pub with rooms. Use this as an example of potential revival, but also of how close many pubs come to permanent loss. Analytical synthesis. Break down the closure pathways into categories: rural fragility, heritage burdens, seasonal volatility, and repeated shutdowns. For each category, list immediate causes, typical warning signs, and the short-term community consequences. Evidence and data suggestions. Recommend pairing each case with local statistics where available, including changes in footfall, shifts in population or tourism patterns, and any available cost estimates for heritage repairs. Flag where precise figures are needed from council records or owners. Expert perspectives to include: one authority on rural economics to link costs and trade patterns to closures, one heritage or conservation specialist to explain maintenance obligations, and one local operator or council member to offer a community viewpoint that can contrast policy and lived experience. Narrative beats and pacing. Start with a human scene for the punch bowl, then move through each case with a consistent template: location, core pressure, local reaction, and broader implication. Pause for synthesis after the midpoint to underscore recurring themes. Closing takeaways for the section. Emphasize that these 7 examples expose structural weaknesses in the pub ecosystem. Highlight possible interventions to prevent further losses and set up the next section on pubs still at risk and urgent actions to consider. Crossroads ahead, visit before they vanish. 8 pubs a week now, disappear for good across England and Wales. For every crooked house reduced to rubble, there are 10 more at risk, places that could be lost in a matter of months. Snapshot of at-risk pubs: the Duke of Wellington, Hatfield Peveril, currently shuttered, awaiting a planning decision for housing. Urgency high: the Rose and Crown, Chorley, facing demolition, regulars already scattered. urgency, high. The new Beehive Inn, Bradford, Edwardian tiles and etched glass threatened by conversion plans, urgency, medium to high. The Golden Lion, Smethwick, dark and boarded, vulnerable to vandalism and developer interest, urgency, high. The Black Horse, Melsonby, on the market, future as a pub uncertain. Urgency, medium. The Railway, Treheford, closed and at risk of being turned into flats. Urgency, high. The Swan, Fittleworth, may not see another leaseholder as developers eye the plot. Urgency, medium to high. The Albion, Loughton, facing a planning bid for new apartments. Urgency, high. The Old Oak, outskirts of Cardiff, still serving but buckling under insurance and energy bills that outpace Friday night takings. Urgency, high. Additional local examples representing a pattern of loss across towns and suburbs. Common threats, surging costs including energy and insurance, insecure leases and rising rent. The lure of redevelopment, where land value outstrips the business value of a pub. Human story. Many of these pubs are unique. Timber beams, tiled bars, walls dense with local memory. For one independent publican, the calculation is brutal. We are busy on weekends, but it does not touch the bills. One bad winter and we are done. Key documentary goals for this segment: convey the scale and speed of closures, then humanize with 3 or 4 focused site profiles, show physical detail, interiors, and the signs of decline. Boarded windows, for sale signs, stripped floors. Explain the mechanics of loss in clear terms: operating margins, lease terms, planning incentives for housing. Include voices from publicans, regulars, a local historian, and a planning official or developer for balance. Suggested segment structure and timing for a 12-minute investigative piece. Opening stakes and statistic, establishing shot and map context, 1 minute. Site profiles, filmed visits to 5 of the named pubs with brief historical notes and current status, 5 minutes. Expert and data section, interviews with a hospitality analyst and a representative of local government, presentation of numbers and trends, 3 minutes. Community and publican voices, focused human testimony and the quoted publican line, 1 minute. Policy and planning lens, how decisions are made and what interventions exist, 1 minute. Closing call to action and sense of urgency, encourage visits and local advocacy, 1 minute. Key interview prompts and visuals, ask publicans about cash flow, winter risks and lease security. Ask planning officials about criteria for conversion and the weighting of community value. Use archival photos to show long histories of each pub, contrasted with current decay. Present a simple graphic showing the rate of loss over recent years and typical cost pressures. Narrative tone and delivery, serious, analytical, and urgent. Emphasize the loss of community value as well as economic drivers. Avoid sentimental nostalgia without evidence. Focus on specific facts, vivid detail, and clear actions. Closing line: these pubs are still open, but barely. Visit them now while you can and consider what local action might preserve one more piece of shared history. Opening summary, stated clearly and analytical. Pressure on pubs has reached a breaking point, forcing a reckoning between those who treat them as economic relics and those who call for urgent intervention. Historical context. Long-standing role of pubs as social hubs and small businesses, exposed to rising overheads and regulatory burdens, with business rates forming a significant fixed cost. Recent policy change in April reduced business rates relief for pubs from 75% to 40%, shifting a large share of costs back onto publicans. Current situation with concrete figures. For a typical small pub, that policy change converts an annual tax bill from just under £4,000 to more than £9,000, a 140% increase in one stroke. This rapid cost shock has accelerated closures. The British Beer and Pub Association highlights a sector-wide tax burden that can remove up to a third of each pound taken at the bar, long before wages, stock, or energy bills are paid. Across the sector, an extra £500 million in tax is now extracted each year, and business rates relief is now less than half what it was. Expert perspectives, balanced and attributed. Industry leaders warn that mounting costs are directly linked to the pace of closures, describing the loss of hundreds of pubs as both economically and socially devastating. This perspective stresses the community value of unique local venues and calls for targeted relief. Some economists offer a contrasting view. They argue that supporting every struggling venue would only postpone an inevitable market adjustment. Changing consumer habits and concentration of spending suggest a smaller, more resilient pub sector may be the natural outcome. Policy choices and implications. One path is targeted reform, preserving characterful and community-oriented pubs through discretionary relief, local measures, planning protections, and support for diversification of revenue streams. This approach prioritizes preservation of social spaces. The alternative path accepts market consolidation, where only the most profitable or well-capitalized pubs survive, reshaping local landscapes and shifting social patterns. Practical considerations for policymakers and stakeholders. Key metrics to monitor include closure rates by region, average margins after tax and energy costs, and the share of revenue retained after all statutory charges. Options range from restoring or recalibrating relief to time-limited grants to incentives for community ownership models and business adaptation programs. Any intervention must be designed to avoid creating long-term dependency while recognizing that abrupt withdrawal of support risks irreversible loss of heritage and social infrastructure. Future outlook and decision point. The sector faces a crossroads, with no consensus on which direction will define the next chapter for Britain's locals. Concluding outline of scenarios. Scenario 1, targeted intervention and reform, aims to stabilize distinctive pubs and protect social value at fiscal cost and administrative complexity. Scenario 2, market-driven contraction, results in fewer venues, greater homogenization, and a concentration of surviving pubs under stronger commercial models. Final note, this is a policy and social dilemma that requires weighing the value of local institutions against budgetary limits and changing consumer behavior. The coming months will show whether the next chapter is one of careful preservation or accelerated consolidation. Every week, an average of 30 British pubs close their doors for good. As policy shifts and profit margins tighten, these spaces, once vital to local identity, slip away. What remains is a choice. We can protect what connects us, or we can let tradition fade, one empty bar stool at a time.